Agriculture. Starring Pig.
It's about agriculture. Agriculture encompasses crop and livestock production, aquaculture, fisheries, and forestry for food and non-food products. Agriculture was the key development in the rise of sedentary human civilization, whereby farming of domesticated species created food surpluses that enabled people to live in cities.
The science or practice of farming, including cultivation of the soil for the growing of crops and the rearing of animals to provide food, wool, and other products. Agriculture impacts society in many ways, including supporting livelihoods through food, habitat, and jobs, providing raw materials for food and other products, and building strong economies through trade. Small farms produce about 1/3 of the world's food, but large farms are prevalent. The largest 1% of farms in the world are greater than 50 hectares, 120 acres, and operate more than 70% of the world's farmland. Nearly 40% of agricultural land is found on farms larger than 1,000 hectares, 2,500 acres. However, 5 of every 6 farms in the world consist of fewer than 2 hectares, 4.9 acres, and take up only around 12% of all agricultural land. Farms and farming greatly influence rural economics and greatly shape rural society, affecting both the direct agricultural workforce and broader businesses that support the farms and farming populations. Global agricultural production amounts to approximately 11 billion tons of food, 32 million tons of natural fibers and 4 billion cubic meters of wood. However, around 14% of the world's food is lost from production before reaching the retail level. While humans started gathering grains at least 105,000 years ago, nascent farmers only began planting them around 11,500 years ago. Sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle were domesticated around 10,000 years ago. Plants were independently cultivated in at least 11 regions of the world. In the 20th century, industrial agriculture based on large-scale monocultures came to dominate agricultural output.
Centers of origin, as numbered by Nikolai Vavilov in the 1930s. Area 3 is no longer recognized as a center of origin. New Guinea, Area P, was identified more recently.
The development of agriculture enabled the human population to grow many times larger than could be sustained by hunting and gathering. Agriculture began independently in different parts of the globe, and included a diverse range of taxa, in at least 11 separate centers of origin. Wild grains were collected and eaten from at least 105,000 years ago. In the Paleolithic Levant, 23,000 years ago. Cereals cultivation of emmer, barley, and oats has been observed near the Sea of Galilee. Rice was domesticated in China between 11,500 and 6,200 BC, with the earliest known cultivation from 5,700 BC. followed by mung, soy and azuki beans. Sheep were domesticated in Mesopotamia between 13,000 and 11,000 years ago. Cattle were domesticated from the wild aurochs in the areas of modern Turkey and Pakistan some 10,500 years ago. Pig production emerged in Eurasia, including Europe, East Asia and Southwest Asia, where wild boar were first domesticated about 10,500 years ago. In the Andes of South America, the potato was domesticated between 10,000 and 7,000 years ago, along with beans, coca, llamas, alpacas, and guinea pigs. Sugarcane and some root vegetables were domesticated in New Guinea around 9,000 years ago. Sorghum was domesticated in the Sahel region of Africa by 7,000 years ago. Cotton was domesticated in Peru by 5,600 years ago, and was independently domesticated in Eurasia. In Mesoamerica, wild teosint was bred into maize, corn, from 10,000 to 6,000 years ago. The horse was domesticated in the Eurasian steppes around 3500 BC. Scholars have offered multiple hypotheses to explain the historical origins of agriculture. Studies of the transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural societies indicate an initial period of intensification and increasing sedentism. Examples are the Natufian culture in the Levant and the early Chinese Neolithic in China. Then, wild stands that had previously been harvested started to be planted, and gradually came to be domesticated. Map of the world showing approximate centers of origin of agriculture and its spread in prehistory. DNA studies have shown that agriculture was introduced in Europe by the expansion of the early farmers from Anatolia about 9,000 years ago.
In Eurasia, the Sumerians started to live in villages from about 8000 BC, relying on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and a canal system for irrigation. Plows appear in pictographs around 3000 BC. Seed plows around 2300 BC. Farmers grew wheat, barley, vegetables such as lentils and onions, and fruits including date, grape, and figs. Ancient Egyptian agriculture relied on the Nile River and its seasonal flooding. Farming started in the predynastic period at the end of the Paleolithic, after 10,000 BC. Staple food crops were grains such as wheat and barley, alongside industrial crops such as flax and papyrus. In India, wheat, barley and jujube were domesticated by 9000 BC. Soon followed by sheep and goats. Cattle, sheep and goats were domesticated in Mehrgar culture by 8000 to 6000 BC. Cotton was cultivated by the 5th–4th millennium BC. Archaeological evidence indicates an animal-drawn plough from 2500 BC in the Indus Valley Civilization.
In China, from the 5th century BC, there was a nationwide granary system and widespread silk farming. Water-powered grain mills were in use by the 1st century BC, followed by irrigation. By the late 2nd century, Heavy plows had been developed with iron plowshares and moldboards. These spread westwards across Eurasia. Asian rice was domesticated 8,200 to 13,500 years ago, depending on the molecular clock estimate that is used, on the Pearl River in southern China with a single genetic origin from the wild rice Oryza rufipogon. In Greece and Rome, the major cereals were wheat, emmer, and barley, alongside vegetables including peas, beans, and olives. Sheep and goats were kept mainly for dairy products. Agricultural scenes of threshing, a grain store, harvesting with sickles, digging, tree cutting and ploughing from ancient Egypt. Tomb of Nakht, 15th century BC. In the Americas, crops domesticated in Mesoamerica, apart from teosinte, include squash, beans, and cacao. Cocoa was domesticated by the Mayo Chinchipe of the Upper Amazon around 3000 BC. The turkey was probably domesticated in Mexico or the American Southwest. The Aztecs developed irrigation systems, formed terraced hillsides, fertilized their soil, and developed chinampas or artificial islands. The Mayas used extensive canal and raised field systems to farm swampland from 400 BC. In South America, agriculture may have begun about 9000 BC with the domestication of squash, cucurbita, and other plants. Coca was domesticated in the Andes, as were the peanut, tomato, tobacco, and pineapple. Cotton was domesticated in Peru by 3600 BC. Animals including llamas, alpacas, and guinea pigs were domesticated there. In North America, the indigenous people of the East domesticated crops such as sunflower, tobacco, squash, and chenopodium. Wild foods including wild rice and maple sugar were harvested. The domesticated strawberry is a hybrid of a Chilean and a North American species, developed by breeding in Europe and North America. The indigenous people of the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest practiced forest gardening and fire stick farming. The natives controlled fire on a regional scale to create a low-intensity fire ecology that sustained a low-density agriculture in loose rotation, a sort of wild permaculture. A system of companion planting called the Three Sisters was developed in North America. The three crops were winter squash, maize, and climbing beans. Indigenous Australians, long supposed to have been nomadic hunter-gatherers, practiced systematic burning, possibly to enhance natural productivity in fire stick farming. Scholars have pointed out that hunter-gatherers need a productive environment to support gathering without cultivation. Because the forests of New Guinea have few food plants, early humans may have used selective burning to increase the productivity of the wild Karuka fruit trees to support the hunter-gatherer way of life. The Gunditjmara and other groups developed eel farming and fish trapping systems from some 5,000 years ago. There is evidence of intensification across the whole continent over that period. In two regions of Australia, the central west coast and eastern central, early farmers cultivated yams, native millet, and bush onions, possibly in permanent settlements.
Agricultural calendar, circa 1470, from a manuscript of Pietro de Crescenzi.
In the Middle Ages, compared to the Roman period, agriculture in Western Europe became more focused on self-sufficiency. The agricultural population under feudalism was typically organized into manors consisting of several hundred or more acres of land presided over by a lord of the manor with a Roman Catholic Church and priest. Thanks to the exchange with the Al-Andalus where the Arab agricultural revolution was underway, European agriculture transformed, with improved techniques and the diffusion of crop plants, including the introduction of sugar, rice, cotton and fruit trees, such as the orange. After 1492, the Columbian Exchange brought New World crops such as maize, potatoes, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, and manioc to Europe, and Old World crops such as wheat, barley, rice, and turnips, and livestock, including horses, cattle, sheep and goats, to the Americas. Irrigation, crop rotation, and fertilizers advanced from the 17th century with the British Agricultural Revolution, allowing global population to rise significantly. Since 1900, agriculture in developed nations, and to a lesser extent in the developing world, has seen large rises in productivity as mechanization replaces human labor, and assisted by synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and selective breeding. The Haber-Bosch method allowed the synthesis of ammonium nitrate fertilizer on an industrial scale, greatly increasing crop yields and sustaining a further increase in global population. Modern agriculture has raised or encountered ecological, political, and economic issues including water pollution, biofuels, genetically modified organisms, tariffs and farm subsidies, leading to alternative approaches such as the organic movement. Unsustainable farming practices in North America led to the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Reindeer herds form the basis of pastoral agriculture for several Arctic and subarctic peoples. Harvesting wheat with a combine harvester accompanied by a tractor and trailer.
Pastoralism involves managing domesticated animals. In nomadic pastoralism, herds of livestock are moved from place to place in search of pasture, fodder, and water. This type of farming is practiced in arid and semi-arid regions of Sahara, Central Asia and some parts of India.
Spreading manure by hand in Zambia.
In shifting cultivation, a small area of forest is cleared by cutting and burning the trees. The cleared land is used for growing crops for a few years until the soil becomes too infertile, and the area is abandoned. Another patch of land is selected and the process is repeated. This type of farming is practiced mainly in areas with abundant rainfall where the forest regenerates quickly. This practice is used in Northeast India, Southeast Asia, and the Amazon basin. Subsistence farming is practiced to satisfy family or local needs alone, with little left over for transport elsewhere. It is intensively practiced in Monsoon Asia and Southeast Asia. An estimated 2.5 billion subsistence farmers worked in 2018, cultivating about 60% of the Earth's arable land. Intensive farming is cultivation to maximize productivity, with a low fallow ratio and a high use of inputs, water, fertilizer, pesticide and automation. It is practiced mainly in developed countries. Impacts to soil and water resources. Climate change is expected to increase the frequency of heavy precipitation in the United States, which can harm crops by eroding soil and depleting soil nutrients. Heavy rains can also increase agricultural runoff into oceans, lakes, and streams. This runoff can harm water quality. A cooperative dairy factory in Victoria. As a region's farms become more productive, its comparative advantage in agricultural products increases, which means that it can produce these products at a lower opportunity cost than can other regions. Therefore, the region becomes more competitive on the world market, which means that it can attract more consumers since they are able to buy more of the products offered for the same amount of money. As productivity improvement leads to falling food prices, this automatically leads to increases in real income elsewhere. Increases in agricultural productivity lead also to agricultural growth and can help to alleviate poverty in poor and developing countries, where agriculture often employs the greatest portion of the population. As farms become more productive, the wages earned by those who work in agriculture increase. At the same time, food prices decrease and food supplies become more stable. Laborers therefore have more money to spend on food as well as other products. This also leads to agricultural growth. People see that there is a greater opportunity to earn their living by farming and are attracted to agriculture either as owners of farms themselves or as laborers. A liquid manure spreader. It is not only the people employed in agriculture who benefit from increases in agricultural productivity. Those employed in other sectors also enjoy lower food prices and a more stable food supply. Their wages may also increase. Agricultural productivity is becoming increasingly important as the world population continues to grow. As agricultural productivity grows, food prices decrease, allowing people to spend less on food. And combating hunger. India, one of the world's most populous countries, has taken steps in the past decades to increase its land productivity. In the 1960s, North India produced only wheat. But with the advent of the earlier maturing, high-yielding wheats and rices, the wheat could be harvested in time to plant rice. This wheat-rice combination is now widely used throughout the Punjab, Haryana, and parts of Uttar Pradesh. The wheat yield of 3 tons and rice yield of 2 tons combine for 5 tons of grain per hectare, helping to feed India's 1.1 billion people. Higher global food prices between 2006 and 2008. Primarily caused by an increasing amount arable land used for growing biofuels and the growing economies in China and elsewhere causing an increase in demand for meat products, which are less efficient than plants in terms of land use, caused the percentage of incomes used for food to increase throughout the world, forcing families to cut back on various other expenditures such as schooling for girls. In areas of sub-Saharan Africa, a decreased agricultural productivity due to crop failures has caused starvation. On the other hand, higher global prices actually mean farmers with successful yields earn more. And this thus increases their productivity. Investing in the agricultural productivity of women in farming communities is of particular importance in boosting economic development and food security in parts of the developing world. Women in some areas of the world, for example in Africa, traditionally have less agency than men, but are often also more invested in farming in terms of time spent. They are furthermore generally more responsible for childcare. Thus their productivity is more likely to translate in gains for the family as a whole.
Animals, farm. Cow, sheep, goat, dog, pig, cat, chicken, horse, duck and donkey.
Problems facing agriculture. Water shortages. Degraded soil health. Farm labor shortages. Limited land, water and energy. Pests, weeds and disease. Rising input costs. Climate change impacts. Underfunded operations. Automation concerns. Barriers to sustainability.
Agriculture production example. The major agricultural products can be broadly grouped into foods, fibers, fuels, and raw materials, such as rubber. Food classes include cereals, grains, vegetables, fruits, cooking oils, meat, milk, eggs, and fungi.